Welcome back, I'm Bill. Let's talk more about lanterns. I've been getting requests to do videos on specific lantern models or families of models. Most recently I did a video on the Canadian 335, and this week a friend of mine brought me this September 1951 American Model 200A. Some people refer to this as a Christmas lantern because of the green fount and the red vent. The 200s were popular when they were being made. They were made for a very long time, particularly in the States, and they're still very popular with collectors. So before we tear into this and look at how it comes apart, how it goes back together, and the functioning parts of it, I thought I'd talk a little bit about the Model 200 family and its history. In the US, these were introduced in the fall of 1950. The very first models actually didn't look like this. All of these have the trademark red vent, or at least up until later on, but the first 4 months that they made these in the States, they had nickel-plated brass founts. Now in Canada, they continued with these nickel-plated brass founts until 1959, so they're quite common up here. In the States, they're very highly sought after because they were only made for 3 or 4 months in 1950. Now in the Wichita factory, in 1951, they switched. Instead of nickel plating, which they were starting to discontinue across all their models at that point in time, they started painting the founts, and they painted them this trademark dark green color. They made the 200, it was still a brass fount under the paint. They made this for roughly the first half of 1951, I think up through April. And then in the summer, they switched, and the 200 went from being the 200 to the 200A. The difference that prompted them to change from the 200 to the 200A was, as Coleman in Wichita was doing across their model range, they were switching from brass founts to steel founts. In doing that, they were painting them all. So the 200A and the 200 are essentially identical, but the 200A has the steel fount. And from the second half of 1951 on, all of the American models would have that steel fount. And for the rest of that year, they made them in this green color. In 1952, they switched. This is a Canadian example, but starting in 1952 in the States, they went with the trademark, what became the trademark red paint. Again, steel founts, and they were like this up until the 1970s. Now in Canada, those nickel-plated founts continued until 1959. This is a 1962 version. You can see down around the edge where it's got some rim rash. This is brass. In Canada, they continued making most of the lanterns with brass founts until the early to late 60s. So they were painted red. There were very minor variations that happened over the years as these were made. Things like, are there 2 rows of holes in the collar or 1 row? Some of these, the collar is plain on the back. Some have a cover for the air tube, presumably to keep bugs from crawling up in there. But they're all basically the same. There's not much difference. So, early 60s, the Canadian one switched to the red, or 1959 they switched to the red paint. Now in the States, they switched to a low vent starting in the 60s. And in Canada, this didn't happen until roughly 67, 68. In 1966, Canada finally switched the 200 to the 200A for the same reason. They switched to steel founts as well. But by then, in the US, they had been using this low vent versus the tall vent since, I believe, 1963. And in Canada, they switched to a low vent in the late 60s. But you can see at this point, the early vents were identical, but the low vents are a little bit different. The Canadian vent retained this round dome shape, whereas the American vent has a much more, it's got a round part on top, but the rest of it is a little more angular. It actually looks quite a bit like the 220 and 228 low vents that were being made in the 1960s as well. So these were made, the 200A, from 1966 to 1970 in Canada, and they were then discontinued and replaced by the 335. In the US, they continued making these low vent Model 200As. They looked pretty much like this. In the mid-70s, they changed the collars and they started silkscreening or printing the instructions for lighting on the collar themselves. And then in the late 70s, I believe 1979 until 1983, when the 200A was discontinued, they made them in this green color. During this time, there were a couple of other variations from about 1954 to 1963. The 202 Professional was made. It was identical to the 200, but it was green, something like this. And it was made out of more durable components. Everything was nickel-plated, or nickel-plated brass, and or stainless steel. Whereas these, the frames are just steel. They have a light nickel plating on them, but when you find them, they're usually very rusted. There was also the 201, which was the kerosene model, and it was green as well. It was made later in the 60s and 70s, and it looked essentially exactly like this. So that's a 200A. There are cases. Pulled out a couple of these for you to see. In Canada, this was pretty much all we ever got. We have the basic green metal case. Funnel can go up here. These have different spacers, so they can be used with different models. Pretty basic. They tend to get beat up and rusty. I believe in the US, the guillotine cases had one model that was made for the tall vent 200s. I don't have one of those. But in the 70s, the Wichita factory made these plastic cases, and these are designed to fit the low vent. They're designed to fit the low vent 200A, and they're very nice. They're a little more durable in some respects than the metal cases. So that's the history of the 200 line in a nutshell. So next, we're going to start tearing into this Christmas lantern, and we'll see what's inside, how it comes apart, and we'll clean it up. I'll cover in summary some of the restoration process, and then we'll put it back together and fire it up. All right, here we go. Now, the first thing I want to mention, I went ahead and emptied the fuel out of this, and there's quite a bit of rusty crud that's on the bottom. So that tells me that there's a little bit, at least a little bit of rust in the bottom. It's more powdery. If there were big flakes, I'd be more concerned. So because there's some rust in there, when I clean up the fount, I am going to put some citric acid in there and let it soak for a while and let that take care of the rust. And then I want to make sure I flush it until any water I dump out comes out clear. So let's get started on this. I'll take the ball nut off. The bail and the vent. See, the bail is held on, it fits through holes in the vent and then is held in place by these two little clips that are there over the top of the burner frame. Take the globe off. Now this is a red parallelogram globe, number 550. This is not the original globe. I think we'll put one of those on there when we're done here. The original globe would have been a straight line, what they call a straight line globe, green, simple Coleman logo on it. This is from probably the 1970s, and looks like it came off. I don't think this is actually a store-bought replacement. I think it came off another 200. Could be wrong on that. Anyhow, so this is our burner frame. It's steel. It's not too bad. It's rusty, as is usually the case on the top, but I've seen much worse. So get rid of this mantle first. I'm just gonna knock that off and away it goes. Kind of hate to do that. These take a number 99 mantle. They'll run with a 21, which is more common. I like the 99s, but they're getting harder and harder to find. So first, we'll take the burner frame off the valve assembly. This is a 7/16 nut. The later versions on the American models, they replace this with a PAL nut. There's a washer underneath there. Usually the washer actually goes underneath here, which prevents the bottom of the burner frame from getting crushed or pulled down. So that's our burner frame. You can see it's steel, the air tube is brass, maybe nickel plated. We want to take this apart a little bit further so we can get it cleaned up properly. And this is nice and easy. The burner cap is coming unscrewed. If you're taking one of these apart, you may want to inspect it. Make sure the screen that's in here is held in place in good shape. This actually has seen some corrosion or wearing around the edge of the burner cap, although the screen is still in there well, so I'm not going to worry about that. You need to have this burner screen in there. If you don't have it in there, the lantern won't run right. It may light properly, but you'll end up with the flame, it'll make a popping sound and the flame will retract back into the manifold and you'll have problems. If this is damaged, if the rim of the burner cap is damaged and that's why the screen has come out, there's not a lot you can do other than to find a donor lantern or to buy a new burner cap. I think Old Coleman Parts still sells these. If it's just the screen that's come out, if you still have the screen, if it's maybe sitting in the bottom here, pop it back in and take a hammer and just gently tap around the edge so that it folds over and is held back in place. If you don't have the burner screen, again, Old Coleman Parts sells those. There may be other Coleman Parts sources as well, or you can use some faucet washer screen. I've never tried it, but I've heard often that it works as well. So this is fine. Now we want to take apart the mixing chamber and the venturi. So it's hard to see because things are sooty, but there is a 5/8 inch nut on here, and if we turn that should break loose, but it may not be. And this isn't going to play nice with me, so I may have to we'll come back to that. I will put some penetrating oil on that and we'll go from there. It may require some heating and quenching to get it apart. So I'm going to set aside our burner frame for now. We'll go back to the lantern, or to the fount. This is the generator, and I think that's a 7/16. You can use a crescent wrench on these. It may be easier. You don't have to remember what size everything is or switch your wrench out all the time. Take the jam nut off. This generator is pretty dirty on the outside, so it's probably pretty dirty on the inside. We turn the tip cleaner up. You can see this turns this eccentric block. That moves this cleaning needle that's inside of here up and down. As you can see, it's not the easiest thing to see, but there is a little tiny needle on the top. When that goes up and down, it pokes through the tiny orifice in the top of the generator. So if this gets clogged with carbon, that's how you clean it out. So we're going to take this generator completely apart. Take the tip off so it can be cleaned. And we will try to pull this out. This is packed. In this case, it's probably, considering the age and that it's original, it's probably asbestos. And that's not going to come out on its own right now. I'm not going to do a whole video on that. You can watch my video on cleaning and restoring old generators to see how that's done. So we'll leave that for that video. So the generator's off. The collar, you can see there's a hole here. It's easiest if we turn this cleaning lever up a bit. And it's got a cutout down here behind the valve wheel. So the way we take it off is we pull it forward and gently lift that around the jam or the valve nut and then take it off the back. On this model, these are steel. The collar is steel. Later ones are aluminum. Most of the Canadian ones are aluminum. And boy, we can see all the dirt that's accumulated on there. So next step, let's take the valve wheel off. There's one little screw that comes off. Sometimes these are held on with a little bit of glue. There we go. We'll want to clean that instruction or direction disc off. There's the wheel. Go ahead and do that. Some of them will have a spring clip on there if they're later than this. These early ones have these two little screws. You'll need a small screwdriver. And they unscrew. Whatever you do, these are small. Don't lose them because these are a very unusual size and they're very difficult to replace. This is good. No, it's not as tight as I thought. So the pump just comes right out. I oiled this one when my friend brought me the lantern just to see if everything worked. And so it's actually in pretty good shape. It's nice. It's had oil soaking in there for a few days and the leather's nice and supple. But I'll show you about that. Or I have a video on oiling these pump cups as well. I want to clean up this whole thing. So on these early ones, later ones are, there's like a spring clip on there and they can be a real pain. These aren't always easy either. This square bit on the end just unscrews. But, yeah. All right, these won't flex so much. So I've got some pliers here that will fit the handle, and they've got some tape on there so it doesn't mar anything. So I've got a good grip on that. There we go. They've got old caked up grease on there and they get really sticky. So this has a little lip inside that helps center the pump cup. This does as well. And actually this whole thing will come apart too, which is what I want to do. Some larger pliers and put it on that. Break that free. This disc here. This backs up the pump, or the pump cup rather, the pump leather. We'll take that off. When we put it back on, we want to make sure that this lip is pointed down into the leather. And now we can just slide the spring and the cap off, and we can clean all of that up and get it nice and polished. And lastly, the air stem. The air stem seals the check valve when it's closed. This fits down inside the pump. You notice it's crimped so that it's square here. That locks onto this. So this is what you're turning when you see the little arrow on here, and you turn it left open and then right after you pumped it up. The check valve is in the bottom. When I pumped this up earlier, the first time it didn't want to hold air. Until I screwed the air stem down, it was leaking. So that tells me that there is an issue with the check valve. I fiddled with it a little bit and it was fine after that, but I'm going to be safe and remove the check valve. I should back this out and show you. This is a tool for removing check valves. If you don't have one of these, don't remove the check valve. Find someone who's got one, go on eBay or go to Old Coleman Parts and buy one. You can use a big screwdriver. At one point I used to use a file that would fit down in there that matched these ears here. I'd stick that down there and put vice grips on it and turn it. And you know, you think it works great until it doesn't. You strip out a check valve and they're a real pain to get out. So the tool's worth every cent. They're not very expensive. So we put that down in there. We turn it until it locks into the slot in the top of the check valve, which I'll show you once we get this out. We screw the center shaft in, and then we screw this nut down. And now it's locked into the slot in the check valve so that it won't slip. These can be really tight. Easy as pie if you've got the tool. If you don't, you can do some damage. So you can see here how those ears fit into the slot in the top of the check valve. Hopefully you can hear that rattle. There's a little bearing in there, and that bearing is what seals it. So it's good it's moving. It's good that it seals at least sometimes, but I wasn't getting a consistent seal. So I'm gonna check that. There are a number of things you can do. I've got a video on fixing check valves as well, so you can look that up. But I think all I need to do on this one is spray some carb cleaner in there. This cap, actually, to get the fuel cap apart, because I need to replace the gasket in there. The first thing to do is make sure the slot doesn't have gunk in it. Screw this down tight, the cap that is, which will lock in the center insert. Then take the screw out, unscrew the cap, and your center insert will fall out. Got a video on this as well. I'll take a propane torch. I won't show you that in this video, but you can burn out the old gasket and put a new one in. Gaskets, again, are available from wherever you get your Coleman parts. Now the valve, that's the last thing here. Normally I would put a little piece of cardboard over it, put it in my bench vise, and turn it out that way. But I've been asked about alternatives to that if you don't have a bench vise. Not everybody does, and the fact is when I first started working on these, I didn't either. So there are some ingenious things you can come up with. So I've got a little tool, actually it's not so small, I've got a tool here that I'm going to show you, and you can make this yourself. All right, here it is. I said it wasn't so little. Now your piece of lumber does not need to be this big. A 2x4 would work fine. It doesn't need to be a 2x6. In many cases, maybe a 1x4 would work just fine as well. It doesn't need to be this long. My concern was the first time I was having trouble getting one of these valves out, it was really hard to turn and wasn't having any luck. And so I happened to dig this out of a pile of a house. They were a junk pile, the leftover lumber outside a house they were building down the street. And I thought, I can sit on this so it doesn't move and cut a slot here. So I drilled this and then used a chisel to knock this out. And I've still got this around. Every once in a while, it's actually easier to do this than to drag out my workmate and the vise. So all you have to do is put that in there. And in this case, I don't think it's gonna be that tight. So I don't need to sit on this thing. But you know what? I just might need to brace it against my leg. So here we go. There. I forget, American valves are much tighter than Canadian valves, and it's usually Canadian valves that I'm working on. So there you go. You know, there are lots of things you can find that have slots in them that are about the right size. Someone years ago even made a video where they stuck the valve in the crotch of a tree branch, and turned it off, or they put it between fence boards and turned it off. So you can use this to put the valve back on when you're done as well. We'll just spin this guy out. And the last thing we want to do is pretty dirty, but we're going to go ahead and take this valve apart. Canadian valves usually are round here, and you just have to grab it with pliers and turn it off. The American ones typically have I think it's a hexagon there. So this is the fuel and air tube. We'll take that off. One of my concerns is this lantern, when I lit it up, ran pretty well, but it was a bare to light, and usually that means that this either the orifice, the pickup orifice, is slightly clogged, and so it seals around the air wire in here and doesn't let enough fuel through for the easy light circuit to work, or this spring needs to be stretched. This isn't too bad, but it is a little compressed. So before we put this back together, I'm going to stretch the spring out to make sure that this wire is lifted up properly, that it's not staying down and blocking the orifice. So that's our fuel and air tube. And lastly, because I'm going to clean this whole thing in citric acid, this is nice and tight. It's very tight, so I'm going to go ahead and put this back in here for the time being. Because it's a steel fount, it's a little more durable. I don't have to worry about bending it. And try to get this, there we go. Get this valve stem nut off. The reason I want to get this off is so that I can put the valve in some citric acid to clean it. There's a graphite packing in here. And if that graphite packing sits in the citric acid too long, or if it gets boiled, it tends to break down and it won't work as well. So, and then we'd need to replace it. I've been asked to do a video on that, but I'm hoping not to have to do that with this particular lantern. So we'll clean this up as well. You can see it's pretty greasy around there. I suspect somebody actually oiled that because it is so tight when you go to turn it. But we'll clean that up and see what's up there. So that's it. That's how a 200 or 200A comes apart. And I'll meet you in the kitchen where we'll do the cleanup. All right, we're back, this time in the kitchen. I'm going to do some cleanup here. I'm not going to narrate this whole thing. I'm going to use some Simple Green. This is generally good stuff. It cuts the grease and the crud, and it does not mess with the paint. It can damage decals, so be careful with that, but it's generally pretty good. I'll use some 4/0 steel wool as well where I need to, not on the paint of course, but on some of the metal surfaces. I'll be putting those in citric acid, but I want to get rid of anything loose that I can first with the steel wool. As far as the fount goes, I am not worried about getting water inside. If there's nothing wrong with the inside of the fount, then I would recommend leaving the cap on, leave the check valve in, leave the valve in, and clean the fount before you take all those parts off. But because I'm going to fill this with a citric acid solution to take care of the little bit of rust that's inside, I don't care at this point. So we'll get started. And again, I'm going to speed this up so that you can watch the process and it doesn't take forever. Now for these metal parts, I'm going to spray this with simple green to just get the bug parts and the dust off. Anything loose. Use some steel wool on that. We'll polish this up later. Just get as much gunk off of here now as I can before it goes in the citric acid bath. You saw how built up that greasy, sticky, greasy bit was on the top of the fount, and it's also on the bottom of this. So that's quite a bit better already. Do the burner frame as well. Yes, I did get the burner tube, the cap, and the venturi off, and I forgot to film that, so we'll talk about that when we put it all back together. Right now, get anything loose off of this. You could use a brass brush or wire brush of some kind on that if you wanted to, just don't be too aggressive. The valve as well. All right. So that's it for the parts we'll do here at the sink, and when I see you again, we'll have some citric acid boiled up on the stove. And here's our lantern stew. What I've got here is 2 pans. You need to separate your brass and your steel and nickel-plated steel, or nickel-plated anything really. If you put them together, you'll end up pickling your nickel plating or your steel and turning it pink as the copper leaches from the brass into the nickel. So try to separate them out. It's not entirely possible because some parts use both steel and brass on the same piece. But the deal is, I've got brass over here. It's a little bit of water. There's about a half a teaspoon of citric acid powder in there. You can buy citric acid powder where canning supplies are sold. It's usually in pretty small packages, so I buy it at a place where I get my beer and winemaking supplies, and I can buy it in 2-kilo bags. You can buy it on Amazon in even larger quantities, I think. It's cheap. You could use white vinegar for this. Any mild acid solution, it's just you're going to be boiling it, so citric acid has kind of the least offensive smell, and basically you're boiling lemon Kool-Aid in a sense. So the brass, I will leave it in here until it looks like it's starting to get clean, the carbon is breaking up. If it starts turning pink, that's when you want to take it out. The steel and the nickel plating I will leave over here. The steel you can pretty much boil away forever. But the nickel plating will, the citric acid will eat through nickel plating if it's too strong. So I do about 1 teaspoon per liter of water. I've got 4 liters here, and I did a heaping tablespoon, so not quite 4 teaspoons. And I will monitor this. The nickel plated parts like the fuel cap and the screw for the fuel cap and the cap for the pump, that kind of thing, I'll keep a close eye on it. As soon as it looks like any rust that was on there, rust spots are gone, or the goop on it, the grease and all that is broken down, I'll take those parts out and clean them right away, but I'll leave the steel parts in there for longer. So I'll let these go, and then we need to deal with the fount. Right, let's deal with the rust in the fount. So I've got this here. This is my bag of citric acid. I'm going to use about a teaspoon. Add them there. And hot water works faster, works more efficiently. So I'm going to pour some water from the kettle in there. And that should be right about the amount we need to fill it before it runs over. Yep. And I'm going to let that sit for a good while, and that should take care of the rest. Once it's done, we'll flush it out. Again, you could use white vinegar, any mild acid solution in there. And to prevent this from happening, you could either leave your founts full of Coleman fuel, which will prevent rust, or something I've done in the past. Coleman fuel is expensive here in Canada, so I can't really afford to keep all my lanterns full. So one thing I've done is you can buy fogging oil anywhere where automotive stuff is sold, and you can spray fogging oil in your empty fount, and that will help prevent rust as well. So we'll let this sit, and then we'll dump it out and flush it with water, and finally we will flush it or rinse it with some methyl hydrate or methylated spirits, denatured alcohol, whatever they call it where you're from, and that will dry it, that will remove the water so it doesn't rust any further. Our brass components are now out of the citric acid bath. They're ready for polishing with the steel wool. This is sort of our final cleaning process before we go to a buffing wheel. I will be just rinsing them with water. I will be using this 4/0 fine steel wool again. It's a little rough, but I've got a little brass brush here just in case we need that. And to clean inside of things like the generator, I've got these round brushes that work really well. You can get these on Amazon or AliExpress for a couple of dollars, and they work great for this kind of thing. So we'll get started here. I'm not going to talk much through this, so I can speed it up, and I'll see you when we're done. Now on to the steel parts. The nickel-plated parts, the fuel cap, the pump cap, those sorts of things I took out a while ago. The polishing process is the same for the brass, and it'll be the same for the steel, although we'll be a little more aggressive because of the rust. So our metal parts and all that are polished, everything's clean. The last thing we need to do before we put this together is to polish the fount. It's got some patina to it, and I'd like to leave it that way. Some people might repaint this, although this is a water slide decal, and as far as I'm aware, no one's making replacements for these. So if you wanted to repaint it, you'd have to use a vinyl decal, and it just wouldn't be the same. So I'm going to polish this paint up, and I think it'll improve the appearance quite a bit. I'm going to start with this Mother's Mag and aluminum polish. I know it's metal polish, but you could use car polish, but this stuff has gives it a much finer shine. I'm sold on this stuff, and it's less aggressive on the paint, so you don't have to worry about taking the paint off. So I'm going to start with this, and then we'll speed up the video, and you'll see when we're done. Polish this off and see how it looks. So this fount has, it's got places where the paint has worn through. It's got, on this side, it's got quite a few places where rust has developed under the paint and it's bubbled up. You know, the paint's not going to be perfect or anything like that, but that does look a lot better. It's cleaner, it's shinier. It's, you know, when you think about the bottom, which hasn't seen all the abuse, it's looking a lot more like that. So now that we've polished it with the polish, we'll give it a little something extra. This is Meguiar's Carnauba wax. It's just car wax. So put that on. Do the old Karate Kid wax on, wax off here. This will keep it shinier for a little longer, and it'll make it shinier. All right, let's polish this wax off. Isn't that beautiful? It's still got the patina, but it's clean, it's shiny. I think it looks great. So now it's time to reassemble. And so So I'm going to actually set the fount aside, and we'll start by putting together the valve assembly and the burner frame. So we've got our valve here. I've just got the nut on there relatively loose. We'll check the tightness on that in a bit, but we'll start with the valve and find that's the pickup tube, and there's our air wire and our spring. I said this spring, it's not bad. I've seen them where there's literally no spring in it at all, but this may not be lifting the air wire all the way up. You can watch my video on resolving fuel system issues, but the deal is for the instant light circuit to work, the valve stem closes and pushes this needle through the pickup, so it almost completely blocks it. So it limits the amount of fuel that can come through so it doesn't flood. And then when you open the valve all the way, it lifts up. And I see it is lifting up, but from the difficulty I had lighting this, it may not be lifting up all the way. So I'm just gonna give that a bit of a pull. It'll compress however much it needs to compress if I pull it too much. So we'll put that back on there. And the fuel and air tube, that's a pickup tube, screws on the bottom. These pieces are brass, so you don't want to over tighten them, but they do need to be snug. And I will adjust the valve stem nut once I've got it on the fount. So before we put that on the fount, let's also put together the burner frame. I forgot to film it, but I did get the burner tube off. That's what was stuck. Deepcrete is great stuff. I just sprayed it around this hex nut at the top here. Now that it's all shiny, you can actually see how that works. It just goes up in there like that. Word of warning, when you take these apart, if you want to clean it, polish it, make it look great and everything, it's really tempting to want to literally take everything apart. And sometimes it's just not worth it. Sometimes these burner caps, this came off quite easily. I got some pliers with some tape on them to grab it and turn it if need be. So that was great. This nut does not want to budge. And I know from experience, if it's sort of locked into the threads there from heating and expanding, especially if the lantern's old, it's been used a lot, I can put a wrench on here and pliers on the tube, and what's likely to happen is, one, I may end up crushing the tube so it's no longer round, and two, if I do screw this off, I'll mess up the threads going all the way up, and then when I put it back on, it won't tighten. So this is one of those things, if the burner cap won't come off, don't force it. You can use a little bit of force with some pliers that have some protective coating on them, but you don't want to smash the tube, and you don't want to chew up the burner cap itself. And also with these nuts, sometimes these are just stuck on there. Just live with it. I mean, that's nice and polished. So these earlier 200s and 200As have this, for lack of a better term, this venturi. This fits down into the air tube. It's built into this U-tube, this mixing chamber. On the later 200, Canadian 200s and the American 200As, this is a separate piece. There's a little venturi that just slip fits in here and then slip fits up into this U-tube. One thing these are prone to, I haven't actually had a problem with it, but I know lots of people do. This slip fit connection can leak. So if you're running your 200 or 200A and you really get a fuel stink, like fumes, it may be because it's leaking vapor at this joint here. Or if if it just doesn't burn right, it may be leaking there. So if that's the case, the best thing to do is use just a little tiny bit of muffler sealant or exhaust sealant. It's high temperature, so it'll handle it, and just put that on that slip fit connection, and that will likely solve your problem. So the vent nut bracket goes underneath like this, and then the burner tube threads into the mixing chamber, just like so. And it's not a bad idea to take that 5/8 inch wrench and just make sure that that's tight. So there's our burner frame assembled. Now, the fount. First thing we're going to do is put the check valve back in. Got our check valve tool. I flushed this through with carburetor cleaner and it is now sealing properly. So sometimes that's all you need to do. If you do soak it in citric acid to clean it, that works really well as well. In fact, before I put it in, I'm going to do the smart thing and do one last check. You can hear the bearing moving, and if I blow on the back end of it, I can't pass any air through it. Now, I can't get enough pressure with my mouth that it would equal the pressure that's in the fount when it's pumped, but still, that should be good. If you soak it in citric acid, you don't want to do it for very long. If you do it too long, the citric acid may pit the bearing, or it may pit the, it may end up pitting the seat, and then it's not going to seal. And you don't want that to happen. Put together our pump assembly. So we've got the handle, that's all polished up. Usually there's a brass, this one's steel. I don't know if that's an American thing. So first the cap goes on, then the spring. Now this hex piece, remember the flange goes down toward the pump cup. And we want to make sure that this is tight. Pump cup and the nut that goes on the end, and again the flanged part goes up toward the pump cup. So these can be a little bit tricky. The easiest thing is just to kind of hold it flat. Turn it, and once again make sure it's tight. Right. It's not going to come off. And our air stem. One thing when I had this on the polishing wheel, I did polish up the tip, also of the valve stem, just to make sure that they're nice and clean and they're going to seat properly. This is easier to assemble if you put this, the air stem into the pump. All right. Now, comes to pump cups. Coleman used neat's foot oil, and they actually sold neat's foot oil for this purpose. You don't have to use that. I actually never have. I know it works well. I find 3-in-1 oil works just fine. When I've been out camping, I helped a guy with a lantern. His pump cup, he hadn't used a lantern in a long time, and the pump cup was bone dry. I didn't have any oil with me. We took some oil off the dipstick in his truck. That works fine too. Basically, any oil will work. Some are better than others, but they're all good unless you use some kind of vegetable-based oil. Cooking oil, olive oil, anything like that, it will work, but it will not last, and eventually it will destroy the pump cup because it will harden and get really nasty, and then you'll just have to replace the pump cup. So you don't want to do that. And we've got these little tiny screws, remember the ones I said not to lose. Those hold on the was easy. There we go. All right, and we have our pump cup in. Just give it a try. That's closed, unscrew it, it opens. Beautiful. Now, the valve assembly. This is a tapered pipe thread. So in theory, screwing it in, you just screw it in until it's sufficiently tight and it should seal. But Coleman still use thread sealant on these, and I prefer to as well, especially once you've taken it out and you put it back in. It may not seal at the point where you want it clocked, the valve oriented according to the Fount. So I use this Permatex blue, and I just put a little dab on either side. And then I screw this in. Now, proper clocking on an American 200 or 200A is with the valve stem over the Coleman decal. Canadians are the opposite. So there, and that's actually, I can feel that's tight. I don't need to use my vise or my big board in order to get this on there properly. I can feel that that's tight, and the thread sealant will lock it in place. So we'll put the valve wheel on here. Try to get the screw out first. Get that oriented nice and straight. These are always great fun. Screwing it in while I've got it oriented toward you so you can see it. Not the way I normally hold a screwdriver. That went better than usual. All right. Now, our half-inch wrench here. We need to see how tight, or if this jam nut is, or the valve wheel is tight enough. So this feels good. It's the valve, I can turn it without it being too tight, but I want to keep tightening this nut until it just starts getting a little too tight, and then I'll back it off. We want this as tight as we can get it without the valve stem being too hard to turn, because there's a graphite packing in there. Okay, so that's just a little too far. And that's right. Right, so that's probably good. There's a graphite packing in here, and it needs to be compressed just enough so that the valve stem wheel turns nicely, but it's not so loose that it leaks. This is a little bit sticky, and it looks like someone oiled it, so it's possible that graphite packing is starting to go. We may need to replace it. That'll be a perfect opportunity to make a video for you on how to do that. But right now I'm going to try it as it is and see how it works. If it leaks, then we'll go down that road. So that seems to be good. It's not a bad idea to check this valve, or this packing on the back here. This is for the cleaning needle. There is a graphite packing in there. It's usually not a problem, and this feels good, and I haven't seen any signs that it's leaking, so I'm gonna leave that, and it does feel nice and tight. Our collar goes back on. The cutout goes on the valve stem end. This was on the top before, but this washer actually goes on the bottom underneath, which prevents this from getting crushed down. And now our generator. I did take this apart again. I've got a video on generators and cleaning them and getting them restored and everything. This is probably the original one that came with this lantern. It's got this asbestos braid. and the spring inside of it. So put that in. Just push it in. Take our cleaning needle and slip that in. I'm just seeing now. There we go. And one of the things you want to check is make sure that needle is still good. You can see it there. I'm not going to put the tip back on the generator until I have it mounted, and some fiber stuck in there. Until I have it mounted and I can make sure that everything's moving properly. So that needle doesn't get bent. So jam that on, lift the eccentric block. You see there's a little hook there. Feed that hook through the eccentric, or through the hole or hook. And hopefully you can see when I move that up, the needle pokes through. When I move it down, the needle retracts. So I'll put it all the way up, which makes it a little easier. I'll put the tip on, being careful not to mess up the needle. Once you've got the tip over the needle, I think it's tapered inside, so it's sort of self-threading, so you don't have to worry about bending it once it's on. And then we'll make this good and tight. Take my glasses off so I can see, and I can see the needle in there, and as I turn this, I see the needle going up and down and poking through the hole. So that is wonderful. Now you can see the generator's a little bent here. This happens from heat. It's not bad. I'm gonna give it just a little bit of a push because I cleaned this generator and I've heated and quenched it. It's a little bit soft right now. So that's a little bit straighter. That'll make it easier to put the burner frame on. So the big hole is for the generator. The little hole is for that center screw. Okay, there we go. Everything's seated right. And that, I think it's a 9/16 nut there. That 7/16. 7/16. And make sure everything's lined up. Put a new cap gasket on there. And I'm not going to show that in this video, but you can pick that up in my video on fuel caps. I believe it's called Fuel Caps 101. I'll put a link down below. And tighten that. And we're almost there. Now, 200s and 200As were designed to run, they were designed to run number 99s. They run better with 99s, in my opinion. The 99 is a bigger mantle. It hangs down lower on the generator, so it heats the generator more efficiently, so the lantern warms up more quickly. But 99s, my understanding is they're not made anymore. Peerless does make an equivalent that you can use, but I like the old silk lights. I'm getting low on them right now, and since I probably won't be actually burning this lantern all the time, I'm going to put a 21 on it. Now in Canada, Coleman specified number 99 mantles all the way through the life of the 200. For some reason, In the United States, they originally specified 99, but the Wichita factory eventually switched and started specifying number 21s, which is what this is. This is an old number 21 from the 70s, I believe. It's an old Silk Light. This is actually a Sears branded one, but these were made by Coleman as far as I know. It's a large weave Silk Light, which is just perfect for these. So I'm going to put a number 21 on there. They seem usually to be just as bright as a 99. The issue is they may take longer, the lantern may take longer to warm up and settle down when you don't have a 99 on it. But Coleman Wichita specified 21s for many years for these, even though when they originally came out, they specified 99s. So I suspect it had more to do with Coleman just wanting to narrow their Mantle family range, but I don't know. So we're gonna put a, whoops, just slipped up too high. We're going to put a 21 on here. So I am going to, this deserves to have an original straight line globe on it. I'm not sure how well you can see that because they tend to be somewhat worn. But I'm going to put a globe that would have been period correct on there. Bail on it. Line up quite properly. There we go. Fitting it on there, and I'm going to gas this up, and I'll be right back to, after we've gassed it up, to burn in that mantle, and we'll fire it up and see how she runs. All right, so we're ready to burn this in. She's got pressure in her, got gas in her. Take a little bit. This burns off the rayon, and what's left is well, a matrix like, and these old silk lights use thorium as their well, that's what makes it glow brightly. It's slightly radioactive. I think that's about right. So I'm going to crack this open. Since the fuel system is completely dry, it's going to take a little bit before we get fuel all the way up to the generator. So I'm going to crack this open a quarter turn, and I'm going to listen until I hear a hiss, or until I hear a sputter rather. You can hear the hiss. That's the air. But what I want is to hear a sputtering. Oh. There we go. That's what we want. That sputtering means that the fuel is hitting the generator. Sometimes with that asbestos braid in there are little bits of carbon that are going to be thrown the first time, which means we're going to get all sooty this first light up. But this is also why I don't like running 21s on these. It may pulse a few times like that because it's trying to warm up. It doesn't quite have the heat that a 99 would give it. So I'm going to leave it at a quarter turn a bit longer than usual. will eventually settle down. I guarantee it. There we go. No leaks so far. And there she goes. That's a nice little lantern, about 300 candle power. So, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.